Hello and welcome back to the podcast. As always, I'm the host, Sean Boyce. I'd like to welcome my guest today, Corey, who is the Director of Product Management at Chief. Hello, Corey. How are you? And thanks for being here.
Sean, great. Good to see you. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Very much so. First question I have for you is, can you tell us a little bit more about what is Chief?
Yeah. So Chief is a private network for executive level women who have achieved the level of VP and higher. We essentially wanted to have a business that similarly mimicked YPO, but provided a place for women who have reached a certain level in their career to be able to converse with each other, enjoy each other's company, and share different experiences about what they're going through in their work life to help them achieve level of power and stay there.
Super cool mission. Very interesting. And if you would, for our listeners as well, also, can you talk a little bit more about yourself, give us some information about your background, what that involves, and how you ultimately became the Director of Product Management at Chief?
Yeah, so my journey is a little bit different than most. I actually went to school for finance and worked for a wealth planning firm for about 7 years. And a lot of the things that I was doing there were very task oriented. I was doing a lot of work for different stakeholders, whether it was investing reports and things like that. And I was just not feeling as fulfilled as I could have been. And I had a mentor who would then become a mentor of mine. Inform me about the career of product management, and he would teach me a lot about product after work, once or twice a week for about 6 months. I learned everything that most people learn in entry-level courses for product management. And then it came down to making that jump, getting a job. So at the age of 30, newly married, I made a huge career shift and changed careers to be the product manager at MakerBot, a 3D printing company. And there I was in charge of web e-commerce, which was a great way to start getting involved in everything product. So at MakerBot, it was essentially their e-commerce site that focused on two main audiences for the 3D printers. And then that ended up taking a little bit more on for their community product as well, where they had one of the largest communities of makers for 3D modeling on the web. So I got a lot of experience very quickly there. And then I transitioned over to a role at Shutterstock, where I was for the last 2.5 years. And I was working on the enterprise platform there. So I was handling e-commerce for our enterprise users, reported to about 450 global sales leaders, and really got to understand what working in product for a large organization was like and how that differed from startup culture. And you also learn how to be, or I learned how to be way more cross-functional and work with a number of different product teams to move things along. And you learn a lot more about process, how important it is, but also how limiting it can be, and that fine line. So I had a lot to kind of build on when I left MakerBot, and I was able to do that very successfully at Shutterstock, where we grew the enterprise business tremendously. Um, then the opportunity to do internal tools came up at Chief, and I looked back at a lot of the work that I had been doing at Shutterstock and realized that many of the projects that I've been working on, many of the products that I had been involved with supported our internal users. And the reason for that is because it was in a typical enterprise model, you had account managers, CSMs, right, is part of that global sales org. And you're building for them and making their ability to do their job even better. So as I started to do that more and more, I found a greater joy in building for my internal team and for creating the tools that would help drive the business forward. So when the opportunity came at Chief to lead internal tools, I knew that it was a great opportunity for me to learn about a business that I truly believed in the mission for and felt good about the work that I'd been doing, but also being able to kind of set this tone for what internal tools would look like based on my experience.
It always strikes me as so fascinating learning more about everyone's background as far as how they got into product. I really like it when it came relatively organically. I mean, that's how it developed for me. I started by studying engineering. You know, I thought I was going to map out my entire career path. I couldn't possibly have been more wrong. But I'm excited and encouraged by the way that it did develop because it was the most engaging throughout the process, essentially. So it sounds like as part of your career path as well too, and your transition into product. Your experience from where you were previously has really set you up well for the work that you're doing now, Chief.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a very big believer that we are the product of our past experiences. And for me, everything that I do, I can name stuff that I've done at the first job I had out of college that I'm still using today. So I like to keep all of that as readily available as possible because it can only lead to better things and continuing improving, which I guess speaks to me becoming a product manager and using regular iterative development, right?
Absolutely. That's exactly how it works. Excellent. Thank you for sharing that. And perfect transition from there to, I'd love to hear a little bit more about the internal tools that you're working on and developing at Chief, and then a little bit more about how you're building those with your team.
Yeah, so I think the best way to start talking about this is we look at things in three different buckets. So essentially, we have the work that is going to support our member-facing work, and this is anything that our members can see, right? That a member would experience as part of their journey at Chief. So we do have a website. We have other features coming out in the future, and knowing that we can support all of that work is one bucket, and making sure that we have the right tools in place to allow our team to provide a great experience. The second bucket focuses mainly on the actual internal tools part of the role. This is vendor management and relationships, service integration, and essentially any custom builds that we would need to create for our team to help run the business. So if Chief is a very in-person, traditionally in-person business, and making sure that we have our team members equipped with everything they need to provide our members a great experience, comes all the way down into the services that we offer our team members. So that's mostly what fits in that middle bucket. And then the third bucket, which is I think one of the most important ones, is data analytics and governance. So everything we're doing, we want to understand why we're doing it, being able to track all of the different features that we're putting out there, both on the member-facing side, but also on the internal side, making sure that it's scalable so that as we grow, we're able to track everything and understand why certain things are happening certain different ways. So making sure that all the different work that we have that fits into that bucket, whether it's the tools we're using to track analytics, or our data aggregation systems, or data warehouse work with orchestration layer APIs, things like that, all fall into that third bucket. So we kind of break out our team in that way, where we have the three different buckets, and a lot of the work does transverse between those buckets, but for the most part, it allows us to keep things moving forward in any, and turning on and off that valve as we need to if there's certain priorities that may come into play.
Excellent. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And I'd love to hear more as well too, because I know Chief has a culture it's very proud of. So I'd love to hear more from you as well too, with regard to the unique aspects of your team and the relationships there and how you've developed those and why that's important to the processes that you guys have built and are following.
Yeah, I think any membership and driven experiential product requires a very strong set of people behind it, in that you want to provide somebody else with a really great experience and enjoyment, and feel that they're getting value out of what we're providing. So it's a very specific personality that you have to hire for, and I think Chief has done an amazing job of building out a team that is able to do that very seamlessly. We have some of the strongest and hardest working people that I've ever had the pleasure of working with. And a lot of them I get to, build things for. So for me, it's even more exciting because a lot of the tools that we're creating are for them, and allowing them to be their best self. But I think even more so, the Chief culture comes into play because of what our mission is and because of what we're providing for our membership. So a lot of the people would love to partake in this in one day, right? You strive to be a member of Chief. You want, a lot of we are predominantly female driven business. So we want to make sure that everything we're providing is in line with what our members would want. And you see that in all the small things. And one of the examples that I have of just like how strong our team is from a non-work perspective is how we've pivoted given the coronavirus pandemic. So, I am a parent of a young child. Working from home or working remotely is a new challenge. Having someone at home that you have to care for in addition to doing your work, and my wife works as well. And I think that many of the parents at Chief experienced a very similar feeling, as I'm sure throughout the entire world, people are experiencing the same thing. And the chief team stepped up immediately, understanding that, there was a need for the parents, and they created Camp Chief, which I think was amazing. And it was a schedule of events where team members would take times out of their own personal schedule to host scavenger hunts, and story time and dance parties for kids, so that they gave the parents back some time. And I think that even though it's a small thing that has nothing to do with what we're offering to our membership, it really shows the strength of the type of people and the character that we have and we bring into the chief community. And for me, that has always stood out, because I've never been part of a company where that has happened before. And so to see that and to know that these are the people I'm working with, it just strengthens the bond you have, and enables you to move forward at an even better pace.
There's rarely anything more exciting than like a strong, healthy, productive culture. And it's always exciting to hear about that making its way from, really realistically all throughout the organization. And, even into the level of like operations from a technical perspective, it's exciting when it reverberates in that way, because it's very much a team effort, and it feels like very unique, and it's a special experience and stuff like that. So I love hearing about the unique aspects of companies' cultures and how that impacts their work, right? And when you have such a strong positive response to a pandemic, right, something that's ultra rare and severely disruptive, that has tendency, like one of the things I've noticed in speaking with people as that has evolved and we've been figuring out how to move forward throughout it, is just how incredible some of the responses have been at some of these organizations, how the teams have actually gotten, ironically, despite the fact that we're not necessarily working with each other as closely in physical proximity, a lot of the teams have grown a lot closer together in terms of further developing those relationships. And I could imagine, if that does continue to happen, that can only benefit the team and its productivity and the work experience for everybody involved.
Yeah, when I talk to prospective employees and I'm interviewing, a lot of them ask like how the team works with each other, and honestly, I go right to the word passion, because in my experience, passion at Chief is an actual feeling, and it's a vibe that when you walk through the door, you kind of get hit by it. Like, wow, everyone is so interested in this company and this mission, and like making it the best it can absolutely be, and to not give anybody a bad experience, whatever that means. And yes, we get that a lot of startup culture when there's the excitement, but for something that's tied so closely with a mission so great as what Chief does, it's really special to see that passion come to life within the employees. So it's just something that I know that I'm blessed to work alongside of, and I couldn't be more happy to be a part of.
Excellent. Thank you for sharing that. And shifting gears here to some of the main content that we like to talk about, right? We like to focus on the product to an extent.
Stuff, right?
Well, yep, that's right. Questions I have for you next about that with regard to these internal tools that you're developing, which is always cool, is to learn more about how you collect the feedback from your customers and how you incorporate that back into making the product and ultimately the company better. So, right, the first step is, what does your process look like? What does your team typically do? How do you get feedback from customers with regard to their experience with your product?
Sure. Well, I can actually speak to both parts here, the external and the internal. So from the external side, we have a handful of different services that we use for customer satisfaction surveys and things like that. We are directly asking our membership base about their experience. I think it's super important to be able to synthesize that feeling, for how a member is with the offerings that we're putting out there, because it is an experience-based business, right? We want to make sure that if they're coming to their weekly meetings or events, or they're coming to the clubhouse or things like that, like how are they feeling about it? Is it serving their purposes? Do they find it useful? Are there things that we can be doing better? One of the things I find most amazing is that we've been around since we first opened our doors in February 19 to membership for our first cohort, so a little over a year ago. And that first founding group of members very much has a feeling of, we're building this community together. And I think that's reverberated throughout the entire membership, but specifically so in that everyone, think about who our membership is, right? They're all very successful and powerful women in their own right, and they all understand how to build something for other people, but now they get the opportunity to be a part of building it for themselves. And I don't think that exists everywhere. So for us, capturing that and understanding where we're doing things correctly, whether it's via a survey or just outright asking and mingling at events and things like that, is super, super important and allows us to continue to build properly. So from that side, we definitely do within a series of customer satisfaction surveys, linking back to our data source and things like that. From an internal perspective, it's a little different, right? Because I can go to our audience and customers anytime I want. So if we're building something for an internal team member, we know exactly who to ask. We have no problem, and none of the typical, oh, do we not send out too many points of communication to a member and things like that doesn't necessarily exist because they're your team members. Of course, you don't want to overwhelm them with things, but it allows for a much more immediate response and qualitative feedback, which I think is a luxury for product people, right? We don't necessarily get that all the time. And you sometimes pray that people will fill out your survey at the end so you can at least have some sort of statistical significant data to use. So I think for us, we generally have a lot of feedback cycles when we're launching things, very in-depth process for product development, which I think is not typical for a startup where you're just trying to get things out the door. But given that our product team is built, product and engineering team is built from very seasoned companies that have process in place, we were able to take a lot of that and bring it to Chief. So we do a lot of pre-mortems, a lot of post-mortems. We do a lot of data analysis on, what the different steps that we're taking, and hey, we added this step in for launch and we missed something. Maybe we do a little bit more deeper requirements gathering next time. So you're able to pivot a lot faster because it's an internal team. So I think from the feedback perspective there, it is definitely a luxury that we have everyone readily available, but just a little bit of a different challenge in how you take that data and then do something with it afterwards.
I think you've done a great job in articulating the nuance there for having to measure something that's more experiential in terms of a product, and it's not just code and tech and features and stuff like that. So there is like a unique savvy that I'm sure you and your team are developing to your process to be able to measure that. And you'll certainly get no arguments from me here with regard to qualitative data. Whenever we can get that,
Yes.
the more, the better.
Yeah.
That's super powerful stuff. So next question for you is going to be, how do you, with all these things that you're doing to capture this feedback, what are you doing to organize that into insights? Like what does that process look like? How do you get the value out of the data that you've collected from the customer?
Yeah, so I think this works for both categories that I had described prior, but I think I think regularity is very helpful. So having a process around your product development cycle is extremely important, because it's very easy to forget to review data after you launch something. So for me personally, if we launch something, there's always like the immediate, how did it do, and check out the data and use like whatever, Google Analytics, whatever analytics tool you're using to see something like that. But I think checking back at the end of the week and then the next week and starting to get a regular cadence of like what your baseline looks like for any of this stuff is very important. Because again, it's very easy to just like slip and forget and then not have the data. And we've probably heard all too many times like, hey, can you do this thing for me based off of X, Y, and Z? And you look and, oh, we're not tracking that, right? The worst phrase in the world, we're not tracking that. So tracking things is extremely important, and then regularly analyzing it, I think, is just as important. We do a lot of, I think, again, a lot of regular touch points with the team is super helpful. So sending out the data that you're finding, whether it's on a weekly basis or anything like that, to your team will also bring about questions that you may not have thought to answer because to ask because you're so involved in it, right? So when you add that degree of separation, maybe send out the data, and again, being at a startup where we can send email to 50 people at our business and it's not a huge deal with data once a week, you can get some great feedback of people like, hey, that's really interesting, but I'd like to see this. So we also track all of those questions and all of those things that come up because sometimes it enlightens us and the product team to look for things from a different point of view that we may not have thought of. As much pre-work and requirements gathering as we can do and goal setting of what we want to track, you're always going to get a different point of view when someone who's not as close to it has some eyesight on it. So I think that's super helpful, is to share that data as well. as you start to make actions. And then as you go, a couple days, a week, 2 weeks after the launch of where you're at, we look at all of the feedback, right? Is it performing the way we expect it to perform? Are the goals that we're aiming to achieve, have they been achieved, or are we on target to do so? And if not, where are some of those weak points? Where are the gaps? So we do a little bit of this gap analysis to see how our expectations are meeting reality, and then start to prioritize what the next steps would be. I think very typically, when we launch products for anything, we create our ideal pie in the sky, and then we cut it down to an MVP, but that also prepares you with a roadmap for phase 2 and phase 3 just naturally. So how does what we've found through our analytics fit into what our phase 2 would be? It doesn't line up with our expectations. Do we need to make changes there? So again, just constantly being flexible and being able to slot things in and out of where we thought we'd be into where we actually are, is again also very important.
The sharing is such a great idea, sharing those insights with your team, especially those that may or may not get the opportunity to speak or interact with customers all that frequently. It can never hurt you to know more about what the experience has been like. And in my experience, especially with like the technical team or whoever is on your team, those that get to see and get an idea of how the product or whatever it is that they're working on has ultimately benefited the customer is so great for building like camaraderie and raising morale and all that kind of stuff. To see the way it really affects those, all the work that they're doing, they get to see the impact of it, right, which is important to continue to help them better understand their work moving forward. And then another thing you mentioned I would call attention to as well, again, too, is this concept of your product, like quote unquote, your product. The more fluid you have that as a concept, I think the better, because that helps you avoid things like confirmation bias. And as you start to get more feedback and it starts challenging some assumptions that you may have had for those later stage plans, like you articulated, phase 2, phase 3 kind of thing, what may or may not be on the roadmap, gives you the ability to make those adjustments, right? And you're making them for the right reasons. You're making those adjustments based on the feedback your customers have given you. So you're going to make that experience better, and you're going to be able to remove some assumptions, and you're going to be able to replace that with data-driven decision making, which is another thing I could geek out about forever. So, well articulated, said it very well. Corey, I can't thank you enough for being here. This has been super helpful, really valuable stuff. I have only 2 questions for you before I will let you go. And the first one of which is, what resources would you be interested in sharing with our audience?
So I think one of the most interesting books that I've ever read that helped me for whatever product I'm working on, whatever team I'm working on, was The Design of Everyday Things. And that, I think it's just meant in general for as overall like a UX UI design book. But for me, I learned so much about how to simplify design into your thinking and how important having design is for building any products. And I think the key there is for me is I'm not building many products right now that are customer facing, but the fact is I still use a lot of the learnings from that book for building for my internal team, and thinking about how they would use the products that I'm building still applies. So that was a huge resource for me that I have a copy of that one and I keep with me at all times in paperback because I want to make sure I have it. And then the other big one that I have been living my life by right now is called Giving Away Your Legos and Other Commandments for Scaling Startups. So it was written by Molly Graham, who was on the people team for Google and Facebook. And she was also, or she's at Quip now, I believe. But essentially this is talking about how to scale a business. And I think it's super relevant now, especially for the fact that I'm at a startup, but we all typically derive value by the amount of responsibility that we have. And I think when you're doing so many things, especially when you're building internal products, it's very hard to want to give those up. And this article really does a great job of explaining why it's important to be able to share your Legos. If you can think about, when you were a kid and you were building a tower, you wanted all of the Legos to build your tower, but you could build a city if you shared your Legos with everyone around you, and you could focus on the layout of the city and what buildings need to go where. So I think as you start to build different products, it allows you to think at that higher level, more strategically about the way things should look rather than just how to build the specific product. And as an internal tools director, I think that's extremely relevant because we're looking to help build the business, not just any single product. So I would very much recommend that. And it changed my life when reading that one.
Yeah, there's some excellent examples. I'll be linking to those in the show notes. And keeping track of them myself. I would like to read both, in fact. So I'll let you know after I get through them. The last one that you had mentioned reminds me of the phrase that I've heard, which I love, which is, if you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, go together, which I
Yep.
love. So it sounds like similar concepts that are being communicated there. Excellent. And last question I have for you is, who should reach out to you and how can they get in touch?
Yeah. So my email is corey@chief.com. We are hiring for product and tech, and we are growing the team as we expand to multiple cities this year. I know we've announced, we are currently in New York City only, but we've announced LA and Chicago, as well as a couple more cities, hopefully by the end of the year. So that is the best way to reach out to me. You can also check me out on LinkedIn. I follow that pretty regularly, Corey Zettler. And if you're interested in learning more about Chief, check us out on the web, www.chief.com. Pretty simple, but there's a little bit about the company there as well that I think is pretty interesting. So,
Excellent. Thank you, Corey. And thanks for being here and sharing your insights.
Sean, thank you so much. This was awesome. Love talking about this stuff.
The Customer Conversations podcast is brought to you by the team at LearnWhy. LearnWhy integrates with all of your customer-facing tools to organize feedback and extract actionable insights. Empower your team to start growing your bottom line today with insights from qualitative data powered by LearnWhy. You can find out more at either learnwhy.co or by emailing our team at sales@learnwhy.co. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Customer Conversations podcast. If you or someone you know has expertise in growth, marketing, or product, please have them reach out to either Sean or Stuart to learn more about becoming a guest on our show. Our team can be reached by email at support@learnwhy.co.